Your brother mocked your failures, but what if every loss was a calculated move to steal $22 billion right out from under him? He thought he was the shark in the water until he realized he was just bait for the monster hiding beneath the ocean. The flickering neon sign of the Grindstone Cafe cast long, sickly shadows across the cracked linoleum floor, mirroring the state of my bank account, or so my brother Julian seemed to think. He leaned back in the cheap plastic booth, the sound of his expensive Italian leather jacket squeaking against the vinyl, a sound that always felt like an accusation. Julian, with his perfectly tailored suits and his portfolio that looked like a trophy case for the financially successful, was holding court, as usual. "Honestly, Mark," he sighed, swirling the dregs of his lukewarm latte, "another one bites the dust? The artisanal pickle venture? I thought you learned your lesson after the self-stirring spoon debacle." He chuckled, a dry, brittle sound that never failed to chip away at whatever meager self-esteem I'd managed to cobble together that week. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, the kind they brewed hours ago and let sit, bitter and unforgiving. It wasn't a failure, Jules. It was a learning experience. Pickles require a very specific consumer base. A consumer base that apparently doesn't exist outside of your fever dreams, he countered, leaning forward, his eyes alight with that patronizing pity I hated. "Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, Mark. I'm being realistic. You have ambition, I grant you that. But ambition without execution is just noise. You chase these shiny, half-baked ideas, vegan dog food, personalized constellation maps printed on silk scarves, and then when they inevitably collapse, you come crawling back to this coffee shop for another round of philosophical brooding." I bristled, my knuckles white around the mug. I could feel the familiar heat rising in my chest, the urge to defend myself, but over the years, I'd learned that arguing with Julian was like trying to reason with a tax auditor, futile and ultimately expensive. "And what would you have me do, Julian? Join your soul-crushing hedge fund? Spend my life analyzing quarterly reports until my eyes bleed just so I can afford a bigger yacht?" He smirked, tapping his platinum watch. "I'd have you find a stable career, Mark. Something that provides consistent ROI. Something that doesn't require me to occasionally cover your rent because your disruptive tech for automated pet grooming hasn't secured its Series A funding yet." He paused, letting that sink in. "Honestly, watching your little hobby projects flame out is starting to get predictable. It's almost endearing in a tragic sort of way. Like watching a very expensive toddler try to build a skyscraper out of Jell-O." The sting was sharper this time. The pickle brine hadn't been the end. It was just the latest in a long line of public failures. What Julian, and everyone else in our family for that matter, didn't know was that every failed venture was just a smokescreen. They saw the smoke. They never looked behind the curtain. The truth was the artisanal pickle company wasn't about pickles. It was about the bespoke temperature-controlled fermentation vats. The self-stirring spoon? That was merely the test case for the proprietary micromotor technology, the same motors I needed for the real project. The vegan dog food provided the perfect cover to negotiate bulk purchasing agreements for rare, sustainable bioplastics. My failures were calculated, strategic withdrawals designed to confuse my competition, namely Julian. He mocked my losses, but every dollar I lost on the surface was reinvested quietly into the bedrock of what I was actually building. "Well, Julian," I said, forcing a weak smile, "maybe this time I'll listen. Maybe I'll just invest in real estate. Boring. Safe real estate." He beamed, delighted by my supposed capitulation. Now you're talking. Boring is profitable, Mark. Boring is how fortunes are kept, not how they're made, but at least it's not hemorrhaging cash. He pulled out his phone, clearly ready to move on to the next item on his agenda, probably involving stock options or a spa day for his mistress. He glanced down at the screen, his expression suddenly freezing. His jaw went slack, and the patronizing smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine, unfiltered shock. "What is it?" I asked, leaning in innocently. "Did the market just crash?" Julian didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on his screen, darting back and forth rapidly. He looked up at me, his face pale beneath the cafe's terrible lighting. The acquisition. The biosensor array that just finalized the merger with Omnicorp, the one everyone thought was tied up in R&D limbo for years. "Yes," I prompted, stirring my cold coffee with a detached air. Julian swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. It listed its primary IP holding company under a shell corporation yesterday afternoon. A shell corporation I've never seen before. They listed the founder as M. Hayes. He looked at me, his eyes wide with dawning horror. M. Hayes, Mark. That's your middle initial. And Omnicorp just paid $22 billion for that tech. How in God's name did you finance something that complex while you were worried about labeling laws for gherkins? The silence that followed Julian's question was thick enough to choke on, punctuated only by the hiss of the ancient espresso machine behind the counter. Julian's meticulously constructed world, the one where I was the bumbling younger brother perpetually needing a bailout, had just experienced a tectonic shift. His platinum watch suddenly looked less like a status symbol and more like an oversized ticking handcuff. $22 billion, he repeated, the number tasting alien and bitter on his tongue. He finally seemed to register the irony. His pity had been directed at a man who had just signed off on an 8-figure equity payout while they shared a booth previously occupied by a disgruntled dishwasher. $22 billion, I confirmed, finally setting down my mug with a deliberate, soft clink. I let the silence stretch, watching the confusion morph into suspicion, and then, dangerously, into something predatory in his eyes. That look was familiar. It was the look he reserved for hostile takeovers. "This is impossible," Julian hissed, pulling his phone closer as if to confirm the news in a different source. "You've been living in that glorified shed apartment, eating instant ramen. You couldn't afford the patent filing fees for that noise-canceling headset you tried to sell me 5 years ago, let alone orchestrate a $20 billion exit strategy behind my back. You always confuse my operating budget with my actual resources, Julian," I explained, leaning back, mirroring his earlier posture, but with a calm assurance that seemed to unnerve him more than any shouting ever could. The self-stirring spoon was the proof of concept for the miniaturized power cell. The pickle brine provided the necessary high-salinity environment to test the polymer sealants for the deep-sea data collectors. And the vegan dog food? That was simply a fantastic excuse to charter private cargo flights without raising regulatory red flags. Julian slammed his palm flat on the table, making the sugar packets jump. "You played me. You let me think you were a charity case. All those times I offered you advice, offered to mentor you, you were laughing at me." "I wasn't laughing, Julian. I was listening. You provided invaluable market intel. Every cautionary tale you spun about risk management, every piece of financial news you bemoaned over dinner, it was all data fed directly into my modeling software. You were unwittingly my best consultant." He struggled to process this. His entire identity was built on being the smarter, more successful brother, the one who knew how the world worked. My sudden massive success wasn't just financially disruptive. It was an existential threat to his self-perception. "The Shell Corporation," Julian demanded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, oblivious to the waitress eyeing us nervously from the counter. "Who is handling the actual transfer? I need access to the structure. If you've done this outside the established channels—" "Oh, I haven't done it outside the channels," I interrupted smoothly. "I built a better channel. You see, Julian, the traditional banking infrastructure is slow, vulnerable to surveillance, and frankly, utterly antiquated. I didn't want my capital tied up in traditional liquidity waiting for escrow clearance." I reached into my inner jacket pocket, the one he'd always teased me for because it was too deep for his wallet. I didn't pull out a checkbook or a business card. I produced a sleek, matte black device, no larger than a credit card, with a single recessed blue light. When the pickle company dissolved, I didn't just liquidate the assets. I used the proprietary encryption algorithm developed for the Constellation Map software, which, by the way, wasn't about stars, but about quantum entanglement for secure data transfer, to create a private decentralized ledger. This, I tapped the black card, is the master key. It doesn't hold money, Julian. It holds access codes. Julian stared at the device, recognition flickering in his eyes, a cold scientific fear replacing the anger. He'd read the white papers on next-gen decentralized networks, the ones he dismissed as fringe science that only crackpots worried about. That architecture. "That's the ghost chain," he breathed. "It's theoretical, uncrackable. If you've migrated that much liquid capital onto an unregistered ledger, $22 billion is currently being dispersed into 37 separate autonomous investment vehicles across 7 continents, each managed by a separate, self-governing AI protocol. Omnicorp's transfer finalized less than an hour ago. By the time their lawyers finish sending the congratulatory emails, the funds will be untraceable by any conventional means." Julian shot up, knocking his chair back. The waitress jumped. "You absolute madman! That's financial anarchy! You can't just—" I held up a hand, stopping him mid-rant. The air felt suddenly thin. "I can, and I have. And here's the real kicker, Julian. This isn't just about my newfound liquidity. This is about the next venture." I leaned in close, ensuring my voice was low and venomous, a perfect mirror of his past mockery. "Remember how you ridiculed my patent application for the atmospheric moisture condenser? The one that looked like a giant, ugly metal lily pad? You said it was useless without scalable energy." Julian's breath hitched. He remembered. He had actively discouraged my former landlord from renewing my lease so I couldn't build the prototype on the roof. "Well," I whispered, a genuine, victorious smile finally touching my lips. "That prototype is operational. It's not condensing moisture anymore, Julian. It's harvesting something far more valuable, and it's drawing power directly from the geothermal vents beneath the abandoned pickle factory you mocked me for purchasing last year." I stood up, feeling taller than I had in my entire life, dwarfing my brother who was still frozen by the table. "And you know what the first major investment for that infrastructure was? Not hardware, not labor. It was proprietary anti-surveillance tech. Tech designed specifically to block external monitoring, like the kind your own corporate espionage division uses." I paused at the edge of the booth, looking down at the man who thought he knew everything. "You spent 5 years mocking the broken pieces, Julian. You never realized I was building a clockwork mechanism, and you just handed me the master key to the treasury." As I turned to leave, Julian finally snapped out of his paralysis, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. His face was contorted, no longer with pity, but with raw, grasping avarice and terror. "Mark, wait! We need to talk about restructuring. We can leverage this. We can bring the family name into this. I can handle the public relations, the regulatory capture. You need me. You can't possibly manage that scale alone." I looked at the hand gripping my sleeve, a hand that symbolized everything I despised about transactional relationships. I gently detached my arm. "You're right, Julian. I can't manage it alone. That's why I'm not going to. But I'm not bringing you in as a partner, or even a consultant." I met his desperate gaze, my expression cold and final. "I'm bringing you in as the first controlled variable." I stepped back, watching the confusion return, only this time it was laced with genuine fear. "The ghost chain ledger isn't just for holding assets, Julian. It's also for managing liabilities. And as of this moment, the liability designated Julian Hayes has just been flagged for immediate, comprehensive risk assessment. You might want to check your own offshore accounts." Julian snatched his phone back, his fingers fumbling against the glass as he desperately tried to pull up his personal banking dashboard. The casual confidence that usually radiated off him like heat from an engine had evaporated, leaving behind a clammy, exposed shell. The ambient noise of the Grindstone Cafe, the clatter of mugs, the low murmur of conversation seemed to rush in, suddenly deafening, as if the entire world had paused to watch my brother unravel. "Flagged? What the hell does flagged mean, Mark? Are you threatening me?" Julian's voice was tight, cracking on the last word. He was still thinking in terms of petty sibling rivalry, of veiled threats over holiday gifts. He hadn't grasped the scale of the shift yet. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling utterly detached, like an observer watching a complex physics experiment conclude. "Threatening? No. That implies I need to intimidate you into compliance. I don't need compliance, Julian. I need isolation." He finally managed to pull up his primary investment portal. His eyes scanned the screen, his breath catching in a ragged gasp. "The European holdings. They're frozen, not seized, not technically. They're just inert. The authentication tokens are rejecting my biometrics." He looked up at me, wild-eyed. "This is impossible. My security protocols are military grade." I corrected gently. "My security protocols are post-quantum entanglement aware. You're still using keys that rely on the assumption that a computational barrier exists. I erased the barrier, Julian. Your entire digital footprint, every stock certificate, every deed, every digitized offshore ledger you've maintained since college is currently being evaluated by the same protocol managing the Omnicorp funds. It's looking for inefficiencies." "Inefficiencies?" he choked out. "You mean my assets?" "I mean the assets you've accumulated through methods that, while perfectly legal by today's standards, are rather cumbersome and, frankly, vulnerable to discovery by my new standards. Think of it as a deep tissue cleanse of the global financial system. And, unfortunately for you, you're entangled in the initial sweep." He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, messing it up for the first time since high school. "You're using the acquisition as a Trojan horse to launch some kind of hostile asset recovery against me? You're using my money, my resources, to dismantle my life?" "Not your money, Julian. The funds that moved were legally transferred from the acquiring entity to the shell corporation, which is currently under my executive control until the final governance structure is established. You were mocked for chasing pickles, but you never bothered to look at the legal paperwork I filed for the dissolution of the Artisanal Fermentation Cooperative, LLC. It contained the necessary boilerplate for an irrevocable transfer of management control under specific catastrophic breach conditions. And what breach conditions qualified? He demanded, his voice rising dangerously. Your consistent, publicly stated contempt for my professional capabilities, combined with your attempts to undermine my legitimate business dealings over the past decade, I stated flatly. It was logged as willful sabotage of potential growth vectors. My lawyers, the ones I quietly hired after the self-stirring spoon debacle, found that language surprisingly pliable. He looked around the cafe wildly, searching for an ally, a way out. The waitress was now actively pretending to clean a spotless section of the counter, her eyes wide with second-hand terror. "You are insane," Julian whispered, sinking back into the vinyl seat. "This isn't business, Mark. This is warfare." "Warfare is merely business conducted by other means," I quoted, a phrase he'd often used smugly during his MBA lectures. "And in this war, you are currently without artillery, supply lines, or communications." He stared at the black card on the table, the object that represented the annihilation of his perceived superiority. He reached for it, slowly, hesitantly. "Don't touch that," I warned, my voice sharper this time. "It requires retinal and vocal authorization to even attempt to interface, and frankly, your voice right now is too erratic for the tone scanner to recognize you as authorized personnel." Julian recoiled his hand as if burned. He was trapped. His immense visible wealth was suddenly locked behind an invisible, incomprehensible wall that his intelligence, his entire way of life, couldn't breach. "What do you want?" he finally asked, the fight gone, replaced by the primal instinct of survival. "Money? I can transfer whatever liquid assets remain accessible through my secondary channels. Just stop this." I shook my head. "I don't need your liquid assets, Julian. They're sloppy. I'm not interested in parity. I'm interested in legacy." I pulled out my actual phone, a nondescript model, and opened a secure messaging app. The screen displayed a single incoming encrypted message. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. It was the scheduled verification ping from the geothermal power unit beneath the old pickle warehouse. It confirmed peak efficiency and optimal resource allocation for the next 72 hours. "You see that geothermal vent I mentioned? The one you suggested I walk away from because the lease was too risky?" I looked at Julian, ensuring every word landed with the force of a heavy blow. "It's not just powering my data core, Julian. It's heating the entire underground complex where I'm building the next evolution of atmospheric regulation technology, a system that will make the current global energy grid obsolete within 5 years. I tapped the screen of my phone, sending a quick, pre-written confirmation back to the system. Affirmative. Proceed to Phase 2. Deployment. Julian watched the confirmation screen light up on my phone, his eyes tracing the silent communication. He finally understood the abyss he was peering into. It wasn't just about him losing money. It was about him realizing he was standing on the wrong side of history, watching the entire foundation of the established order being quietly dismantled and replaced by my hidden infrastructure. "Phase 2, Julian whispered, his voice laced with dread. "What is Phase 2? I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile devoid of warmth or sibling affection. "Phase 2, Julian, is when the public finds out the real purpose of the artisanal pickle brine. It wasn't a fermentation agent. It was a highly efficient catalyst for synthesizing stable room temperature superconductors. and the entire production chain was just successfully replicated using automated microfactories housed inside the old R&D testing facility, the one you insisted on shutting down last year because the security overhead was too high? I leaned in one final time, the smell of stale coffee suddenly sickening. The facility you shut down, Julian, it just finished producing the first 1,000 units of the superconducting wire that will render every copper-based power grid, every conventional motor, and every single piece of electronic infrastructure you own completely obsolete by sunrise tomorrow. And I need the final critical piece of physical infrastructure secured before that happens. Julian stared, paralyzed. What piece? The one thing you refused to sell me 2 years ago, I said, my gaze locking onto the thick, antique steel door leading to the cafe's rarely used back storage room, a door that opened directly onto the rarely patrolled alleyway behind the building. The antique, lead-lined Faraday cage safe you keep in your basement office, the one your grandfather used to store the original plans for the Continental Power Grid. I need those analog blueprints to calibrate the final magnetic shielding for my primary mainframe. And now, the ghost chain has verified your location and provided me with the necessary access override codes. The air in the Grindstone Cafe seemed to vibrate with the sheer impossibility of my declaration. Julian didn't need to ask how I knew about the lead-lined safe in the sub-basement of his corporate tower downtown. The cold reality of my total informational supremacy had already sunk in. He looked from my calm face to the black access card resting innocently on the sticky table and back again. His fortress was gone. I held the blueprints to its demolition. "You can't get into my tower," he stammered, attempting a last-ditch defense rooted in physical security. The tower security matrix is entirely analog on the ground floor, reinforced concrete, redundant biometric scanning, which is why I didn't try to walk in, I cut him off, pulling a set of keys from my pocket. Heavy, old-fashioned iron keys, completely out of place with the high-tech drama we were enacting. You see, Julian, I didn't need to hack your network. I just needed leverage against the one person who could get you access without raising flags. I tossed the keys onto the table. They landed with a heavy, metallic thud, immediately capturing the attention of the now openly staring waitress. "Who are those for?" Julian asked, his voice hoarse. "The maintenance entrance to the sub-basement utility shafts. Your head of security, Mr. Vance, has always been meticulous about his key ring maintenance. He leaves his spare set in his gym locker at the Metropolitan Club, which, incidentally, I had the pleasure of visiting this morning while you were still reading the financial news feeds." Julian looked at the keys, then back at me, a horrifying realization dawning. I hadn't just prepared for this moment. I had been staging this confrontation for weeks, possibly years, using the social fabric of our lives as my stage dressing. "Vance will tell you he lost them," Julian said weakly. "He already did," I replied. "He reported them missing precisely 30 minutes before our meeting here. He was quite distressed. I offered him a substantial, untraceable severance package to retire immediately. He took it, assuming the loss of the keys was the result of some clumsy affair rather than corporate espionage. People, Julian, are remarkably predictable when you offer them a clean exit." I pushed the black access card toward him. "The ghost chain is moving the asset deployment sequence for the superconductors to run a full system activation sequence in exactly 90 minutes. That means the global grid starts to shift. Massive localized brownouts for anyone still running on copper infrastructure, right when the morning trading rush begins. But your own infrastructure is running on the new wire," Julian argued, clutching at the last logical thread. You won't lose power. Precisely. I won't lose power. I'll gain control over the transition. The analog blueprints in your grandfather's safe are the final fail-safe matrix for the magnetic shielding. Without them, my system runs. Yes, but it runs loudly. It generates enough residual magnetic interference to crash every legacy server in a 50-mile radius, including the main frame of Omnicorp, which you conveniently failed to diversify away from last quarter. I watched him pale again. Omnicorp. The company that just paid $22 billion for my IP was about to experience a crippling, system-wide digital seizure unless I implemented the final analog calibrations. I had secured the payout, and now I was securing the longevity of the technology by forcing Julian to cooperate. "You need me to go down there, don't you?" he whispered, understanding the trap. "You need me to use my credentials to authorize the door access, because only I can override Vance's system locks without tripping the central mainframe alarm, which would alert every government agency monitoring the sector." "You are an excellent, trusted, high-level executive," I confirmed. "You are the only person currently authorized to initiate the manual override sequence to access the lowest sub-level vault without triggering a hard lockdown. You open the safe, you retrieve the rolled parchment, and you hand it to me." "And then what, Mark? You let me keep my life? You unfreeze my assets?" The greed was still warring with the terror in his eyes. He still saw a negotiation. I chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Julian, you truly never understood what this was about, did you? It was never about money. It was about proving that the noise you despised was actually the sound of inevitable change." I stepped away from the table, making my exit deliberate and final. "I don't need your assets. The ghost chain is already reallocating the frozen funds to humanitarian development trusts. The only entity my protocols deemed less inefficient than your portfolio. You get nothing back. But I do need that blueprint." I glanced back at the door to the alley, then at Julian, who was now frantically checking his pockets for a security badge he knew he wouldn't be able to use. "You have exactly 30 minutes to get to your office and open that vault, Julian, because after the 30-minute mark, the ghost chain moves into its final deployment phase, and the system recognizes any attempt to access that specific physical location, your basement, as a hostile intrusion attempting to sabotage the new global grid. If you're anywhere near that safe when the system initiates its final security sweep—" I paused at the door, the metal handle cold beneath my palm. "Let's just say the magnetic field generated by the superconducting wire is highly responsive to unexpected biological signatures within the immediate vicinity of the ancient shielding. You might find your last moment spent in a very sudden, very specific kind of static." The cafe door swung shut behind me, the small bell above it giving a tinny, pathetic jingle that marked the end of my audience with Julian. Outside, the city noise, the blare of car horns, the distant siren, felt muffled, distant. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, the cool morning air doing little to calm the high-frequency hum thrumming beneath my skin. 90 minutes. The countdown had begun, and the fate of my meticulously constructed empire and Julian's very existence hung on his desperate, panicked compliance. I didn't wait around for confirmation. I walked 2 blocks to the discreetly parked, unmarked black sedan, the vehicle Julian had always assumed belonged to my failed tech ventures venture capitalist. It was, in fact, the mobile command hub for the deployment team. Inside, the lead technician, a woman named Anya, whose expertise in low-level firmware was legendary, looked up from her array of monitors. "Status report, Anya." Mainframe running diagnostics on superconductivity integrity mark. We're holding at 98.7% confidence for stable transition. The energy draw from the geothermal source is optimal. The only variable remaining is the final magnetic shielding calibration. We need those analog matrices from the tower. And Julian? His corporate security system just broadcast an emergency internal memo about a catastrophic system-wide password failure affecting high-level executive access, Anya reported, a slight smirk playing on her lips. He's locked out of everything except his phone and whatever physical keys he has on him. He's scrambling. I settled into the passenger seat. Good. Keep me updated on his ingress. If he hesitates, if he tries to call his lawyers, if he even pauses to reconsider his options, the system assumes sabotage. For the next 20 minutes, the tension inside the sedan was agonizing. Anya tracked Julian's progress through the city's traffic cameras. A small, frantic man in an expensive suit, driving with reckless abandon toward his own corporate headquarters. He was fueled by pure, unadulterated self-preservation. He's at the tower entrance now, Anya announced, using the magnetic bypass scanner on his access card. It's registering, but the system is red-flagging his internal credentials based on the preceding system failures. Keep pushing, I instructed. The access codes I uploaded via the ghost chain, the ones derived from the pickle company's dissolution paperwork, should override the biometric lock for exactly 3 minutes before the system reverts to hard lockdown protocol. Anya watched the monitors intently. He's in the lobby, now descending rapidly via the executive elevator. He's bypassed the security desk entirely. They're too busy dealing with the digital chaos to notice one panicked CEO. My gaze was fixed on the countdown clock ticking down toward the 90-minute mark. 60 minutes remaining for the deployment, but only 30 minutes left for Julian to retrieve the plans before the security sweep initiated. He's reaching the sub-level access door, Anya reported, her voice tight. He's entering the manual override sequence now. Yes, the steel door is cycling open. He's going into the vault area. A moment of silence stretched, broken only by the whirring of cooling fans in the command center. Julian had done the unthinkable. He had walked directly into the maw of the trap I'd laid years ago, trading his entire legacy for a chance to save his digital skin. He's at the safe, Anya breathed. He's inserting the iron keys. He's turning the tumblers. 1, 2. Mark, he's opening the latch. The image I held in my mind was vivid. Julian, bathed in the dim emergency lighting of his own basement, finally prying open the heavy steel door of his grandfather's chest, revealing the brittle rolled parchment inside. He's taking the plans, Anya confirmed, relief flooding her voice. He's rolling them up. Wait, he's not moving toward the exit. What? I snapped, leaning forward so hard my knee hit the dashboard. Anya, track his movement. Where is he going? He's not leaving the vault area, Mark. He stopped directly in front of the primary utility conduit, the one that feeds into the mainframe cooling junction. My blood ran cold. He's trying to sabotage the junction? He's not just saving himself, he's trying to burn the whole thing down with him? Negative, Anya corrected, her fingers flying across the keyboard. He's not sabotaging it. He's inserting something into the exposed conduit opening. Mark, he's using the old blueprints. He's not just giving them to you. He's using the analog paper itself as a physical short. I slammed my hand on the roof of the car. No, that paper is highly conductive once exposed to the local humidity gradient. He'll cause a localized magnetic pulse. It won't take down the whole system, but it will instantly fry the localized shielding calibration module. Anya shouted, 10 seconds to final deployment sequence. Mark, if that module fries now, the system launches without the final analog dampening layer. The magnetic interference will be catastrophic. It won't just crash Omnicorp. It will cause system-wide feedback loops. We lose control, and the entire grid transition destabilizes. I didn't think. Instinct, honed by years of building in the dark, took over. I grabbed the heavy iron keys from the console, the keys to Vance's locker, the keys that open the service access to this very block. Anya, divert 5% of localized geothermal output to the nearest magnetic containment field array, the one disguised as the public art installation on 4th Street. Overload it now. That will cause a massive city-wide blackout for 3 seconds, Mark. It'll trip every fail-safe in the city, she screamed over the rising alarm klaxons. Do it! As Anya executed the emergency override, the world outside the car went instantly, profoundly dark. The city vanished into a deep, silent void. In that absolute blackness, I threw open the car door, sprinted toward the alley behind the cafe, and jammed one of the heavy iron keys into a maintenance panel concealed behind a dumpster. The panel that controlled the localized electromagnetic dampeners for this entire block, the last shield protecting my core infrastructure from accidental feedback. I ripped the panel open and saw the wiring. Thick, humming cables, just as the countdown on Anya's remote feed hit 0. Deployment sequence initiated. A blinding, silent pulse of blue-white energy radiated outward from the direction of the geothermal plant downtown. Not a visible explosion, but a wave of pure, structured energy washing over the grid. The lights in the city flickered back on, but they were different. Cleaner, steadier. Anya's voice crackled through my earpiece, shaky but triumphant. Mark, we're online. The transition held. The new grid is stable. We bypassed the local surge. The superconductors are integrated across the entire eastern seaboard. I leaned against the cold brick wall, breathing heavily, tasting ozone. I had won. Julian's final desperate act of spite had nearly destroyed the launch, but the emergency counterpulse had stabilized the system just as the primary sequence completed. And Julian? I asked, wiping sweat from my eyes. Anya checked the sensors monitoring his tower's sublevel. The localized feedback pulse from the conduit short-circuited the emergency lighting in the vault chamber only. He's alive. But the security sweep engaged immediately after the power surge normalized. The system didn't recognize his credentials anymore. It only recognized the anomaly, the foreign biological presence near the shielded mainframe. What did the system do? I asked, dread returning, not for myself, but for the final, irreversible consequence of Julian's greed. Anya hesitated for a beat, a long professional beat of silence. The final automated directive, Mark, was to secure the system from internal contamination. It sealed the vault doors with molten polymer, instantaneous, irreversible lockdown. He's trapped in a lead-lined, magnetically sealed room, deep underground with nothing but a useless set of antique keys and the knowledge that the world just ended and he wasn't invited to the next one.